afternoon. I'm Nick Pappas, editorial page editor at the Telegraph in Nashua, and I'd like to welcome you to the TV studios of Nashua High School South, where for the next 60 minutes, the Telegraph Editorial Board is going to discuss the issues of the day with Jon Huntsman, a former governor of Utah and a candidate for president of the United States. Governor, welcome to Nashua. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to start, I noted the other day you did your 100th campaign event in New Hampshire. And during that time, I'm sure you've done a lot of talking, and I'm sure you've done a lot of listening. And I'm interested if you could share with us, what is it you've heard from the people of New Hampshire that either surprised you or reinforced a sense you have of how they're viewing what's happening in the country right now?
Our 100th event was last night in Portsmouth, and it was a large town hall meeting. So when you start the process, as we did 6 months ago, you get a trickle of people into a house party. And if you're successful, that then morphs into town hall meetings where people turn out in numbers, and they did, and they have recently. So last night was fantastic. And what I like about it, and then we'll get to what I'm hearing, is New Hampshire is the window through which the rest of the country is able to see, analyze, and evaluate the candidates. That's devoid of artificiality and nonsense, which we have far too much of in our campaigns. And you play a critical role. And I would say that the voters and the people here in New Hampshire, they punch well above their weight, because when you render a judgment in this state, people pay attention, because you've had a chance to get close to the candidates, to hear them out, to see them up close and in personal ways, and to ask them questions. And so the decisions that come out of New Hampshire in terms of how you evaluate the candidates, I think are taken very seriously beyond. So I listened to the voters here in the state, and now that we're on tonight, our 101st public event, what I'm hearing consistently, and you hear this in other parts of the country, and therefore I was always interested to see if it would resonate with the same level of volume and earnestness here, and that is jobs. The joblessness problem in this country is at the forefront of people's minds, and they want it addressed. And they want solutions that are tied to a candidate's background, that are tied to reality in the marketplace, and that are tied to an ongoing vision that is good for this country. But something that will deal with closing the gap on this problem of joblessness in America, provide more opportunity and more jobs. And second, I would have to say that what I hear fairly consistently is the issue of a trust deficit. So we have an economic deficit, we all understand that. But there's a trust deficit too that is coming through loud and clear. And that is, people are losing trust, I sense, I hear, I feel, in their institutions of power, whether that's Congress, whether that's the executive branch, or whether it's Wall Street. No leadership. We haven't had confidence-building events in a long while that have given reason to hope, people reason to believe in our current structure, our current leaders. And I think that's corrosive, and I hear about that too. So these two issues in particular, joblessness, because I do believe that joblessness is driving the divide we have in this country, which is unnatural, it's unhealthy, and I think it's un-American to be as divided as we are as people. And it's driven, it's exacerbated, it's made worse by the hopelessness and despair that go along with individuals, moms, dads, families without employment.
Governor, there's been some talk recently that the president made comments about a certain laziness in this country that one of your rivals has been quick to comment on in terms of drawing jobs and business. Is that something you see or have any thoughts on?
This isn't a lazy country. This is the world's most innovative country, whose workforce is the most productive in the world. I've lived overseas 4 times. I guess I'm in a position to compare and contrast. We're an optimistic problem-solving people. I think maybe what frustrates members of the business community and those in the creative class is that we have so mired ourselves in red tape and regulation that it's no longer worthwhile taking a risk. And so when two things occur that are now at play in the marketplace. When you can't access a line of credit to start up a business, when the barriers to entry from a regulatory standpoint are so burdensome that you're no longer willing to run a risk as an entrepreneur, you're stuck. So we're that, as a 40-year motorcycle rider, I like the analogy that we're stuck in neutral. We can't kick this economy into first gear, we're stuck. And so long as we have problems accessing capital, so long as we have problems with our creative class, our entrepreneurs and our innovators staring down the burdens of the marketplace, we're stuck. And so you say, why do we have high levels of unemployment? Why do we have this sense of hopelessness? Why aren't businesses pouring capital expenditures into the marketplace when they have cash on hand? Because there's no confidence. There's no confidence in our tomorrow. That's completely changeable. But today, the current situation is that there's no confidence in our tomorrow. People are sitting on their hands. They're not hiring when they should be hiring. And they're not deploying capital when they want to expand their businesses. But if you can't see around the bend, who's going to want to run the risk? Healthcare costs that are out of sight, that are unpredictable. Financial regulations that nobody can quite make sense out of. Manufacturing regulations that make it very, very difficult to expand. So we're stuck.
So how do you change the confidence piece?
You change the confidence piece by having a candidate put forward a bold and simple set of steps that will reinvigorate the market. Yeah, I did it as governor. I have seen where this can happen. We had a pretty good state in Utah. We weren't number one in terms of job creation. We weren't leading the nation in terms of the most competitive state, the best place for business, the best managed state in America. We got all of that done. And it started with sitting down with, during the 2004 campaign, sitting down with a very diverse cross-section of investors, entrepreneurs, business folks, academics, to try to define why it was that college graduates were leaving our state. When your brain power begins to leave your state, you're in trouble. That's your tomorrow. That's your intellectual energy going forward. When entrepreneurs are not as active as they should be, when investment isn't flowing into your state or your country, in our case, you got a problem. And the problem very quickly becomes your competitive environment. So if capital is a coward, and if it flees risk wherever it happens to be, and it finds a safe haven somewhere else, you've got to fix your marketplace. We had to fix our marketplace in our state, and we did. We have to fix our marketplace here in the United States. We have to reorient it toward one that encourages brain power and encourages investment and encourages what I like to term what is very possible at this point in our nation's history, a renaissance in manufacturing. We have the most productive workforce. We have great colleges and universities. We have rule of law. We have a history of being a great manufacturing power. When I was born in 1960, we exported $3 for every $2 we imported. We owned 36% of the world's GDP. Of our GDP, 25% was derived from manufacturing. Today it's 9%. That is unsustainable for 25% of the world's GDP. So we've got to get back in the game in terms of making things and adding value to products that we innovate and manufacture in America. It's not going to be easy, but we must take the steps necessary to begin creating a marketplace that speaks to the confidence necessary to bring in capital, bring in brain power, and keep American companies doing it here as opposed to abroad.
Can you say one thing you did in Utah along those lines as an example?
I created a flat tax in Utah, one of the few in the country. People said it couldn't be done, it'd be a high hurdle. Of course, it took us 2 years to do it. I campaigned on it, and our first year, we didn't get it done. Too much in the way of opposition. My plan was to phase out loopholes and deductions, lower the rate, broaden the base, and simplify, and to do it in a revenue neutral fashion. The second year, we got it done. And between delivering a flat tax in our state and double weighting as opposed to triple weighting the inputs for our business tax, our state came to life. And all of a sudden there was the buzz about the state that is looking out for its economic future and investments started coming in, businesses started knocking on our door. They saw that we were serious about our economic development, about our economic well-being, about our environment in which businesses operated. And that probably did more than anything to really fire our engines of growth in our state. What happened? Unemployment went down at one point to 2.4%. We were the fastest growing state in America for the simple reason we had opportunity where others didn't. California was dying on the vine. People were making the journey from not only from California but every corner of this country because they wanted the dignity of a job and they could find it. And of all places, Utah. So with that, we were able to deliver the largest tax cut in the history of the state, triple the rainy day fund, balance our books, maintain a AAA rating with the agencies, and ultimately became the best managed state in America, according to the Pew Research Center, which doesn't always favor conservative organizations.
Are these solutions that can be translated to a national scale, or so what is the?
I think so, because the state is a microcosm of the country. The challenge is the same. The principles are the same, I do believe. And so I put forward a tax reform effort that the Wall Street Journal has come out, their editorial page, and endorsed. The only candidate to be endorsed by the Wall Street, whose jobs plan is endorsed by the Wall Street Journal. That's a pretty good start when you have the most respected editorial voice in the country on the economic side come out and say your plan is the best of the bunch and the most pro-growth plan they've seen of a candidate in a very long time. And all I'm asking to do, similar to what I did as governor, is to phase out the loopholes and the deductions in total. Clean out the cobwebs on the individual income side, and lower the rates to 8, 14, and 23% based upon income. And on the corporate side, to phase out corporate welfare, because we can't afford it anymore. And I don't like the way that it distorts the marketplace. And to phase out subsidies for the same reasons. It's a tall order, of course, but it can be done. You can prove it at the state level, you can prove it at the federal level. It'll be the will of the people, I believe, after the 2012 election. They're going to speak out in favor of a plan like this. And that allows us then to take corporate rates down from 35% to 25%. So it's bold, but I'm also a believer in the idea that, this economy has hit the wall. We're in a bad place economically, and it's going to take a bold, courageous proposal that is as big and courageous as the challenges are that we face on the other side. The half measures aren't going to work. A 999 proposal isn't going to work. It isn't going to get any traction in Congress because no member of Congress is going to want out their sales tax by 9%, particularly in this state. And Romney is just trimming around the edges, nothing bold. Rick Perry, he's proposed a flat tax. I know some about flat taxes. I did one. But it's an option. And so the current system remains in effect. So if you're gaming the loopholes and the deductions today, you're going to keep gaming them. So I say they're all, kind of nice, but they're not bold enough for what we need today, given the challenges we face. So I'm calling for that in the way of tax reform. I'm calling for regulatory reform, which is to jettison Obamacare and to do away with Dodd-Frank because of two significant flaws I see there, one of which are the challenges that it puts on local banks, the requirements they have to live up to now that make it virtually impossible for a small business person to get a loan unless you meet certain coverage requirements that are impossible for an entrepreneur. And second, it gives protection to the whole notion of too big to fail in our banking system, and I think long term that's very dangerous. It's a bad place for us to be in as a country. And then third, I want to take some steps toward energy independence, which is completely doable. We've talked about it under 8 presidents. We've made very little in the way of positive forward momentum. We're still addicted to 60% imported oil. We have a transfer of wealth of $300 billion a year to unfriendly transactional regimes in parts of the world. And I say, we wake up to the fact that we have more natural gas in this country than Saudi Arabia has oil. And I say, how stupid are we? I mean, when are we going to get with the picture about converting to transportation for natural gas, converting to energy, and electricity, and converting to basic manufacturing, all of which can draw a whole lot more from natural gas. There's just no leadership. There's no one leading the way and saying that we're moving forward toward greater energy diversity, and we're not looking back. And we're going to draw from that which is ours, that's more affordable, that's better for the air, and that it has national security implications. So it's just, some simple steps. For example, like breaking down the distribution network in this country that favors one product, oil. It's like the broadcast communication monopoly in the early 1970s. So the Federal Trade Commission looked at it, the Senate Judiciary Committee looked at it. It was blown open. So what do we have today versus what we had in the early 70s? That same thing needs to happen to our distribution network for oil. So we can accommodate a multiplicity of alternative sources of fuel. Now, why do I know this, and why do I feel passionately about it, among a whole lot of other things? I drove a car as governor on natural gas. I didn't even think you could. But I met an entrepreneur in the northern part of our state who wanted to convert my car. I paid him out of pocket to do it. Started a conversation in parts of our state about alternative fuels. The rate limiting factor becoming there's no infrastructure. You can drive it 300 miles with 2 tanks in the back, but you get stuck in the middle of the desert. What good is that? So we took some steps, along with a leading utility, to improve and bolster the infrastructure in our state and provide the infrastructure such that we could create a natural gas corridor linking one end of our state to another that would accommodate natural gas cars. This can be done nationally. I have no doubt about that. It just takes a little bit of leadership with a focus on the goal.
With the economy being the number one issue, what do you expect is going to happen between now and Election Day with the current leadership in Congress and President Obama? And what will the next president be facing? What are your hopes that could possibly happen between now and then that might improve things? And what are the first steps you would do to help bolster the economy?
Nothing's going to happen. We're stuck. The president had 2 years in which to bring about some changes. He failed. We got Obamacare and a lot of uncertainty in terms of our direction as a country. And as is the rhythm in politics, at least in governance, either as a governor or president, you've got 2 years in which to get things done. You've got the will of the people, the support of your legislature, your Congress, the benefit of the doubt by others for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, the door closes. And that's where President Obama is today. So it doesn't matter whether he comes here, goes to Ohio, goes to California, talks about jobs. Nobody cares. Nobody's paying attention because there's nothing he can do. The door is closed, and now people are looking at 2012. So I think the economy continues to muddle along at high levels of unemployment, probably north of 8.5 between now and Election Day, anemic GDP growth, and a muddled place in the world that is ill-defined, which is a sorry place for the greatest nation that ever was to be. And I say we deserve better than this. We as a people deserve better than this. And then all eyes are going to be on the 2012 election and the debate that will surround the policy proposals from the different candidates. And what I'm going to do the day that I'm elected, I will visit Congress and I will say the 3 things that I want to get done. No more, no less. 3 things that are pro-growth and that will fire the engines of growth and confidence in this country. Because let's face it, we're up against a psychological barrier in the marketplace as well. People don't believe in ourselves anymore. They don't believe that we can make this economy move. They want to get busy, they want to get after it, but there's no confidence today. I saw this from China, living 10,000 miles away. You walk the streets of Beijing and there's euphoria. 8, 9, 10% economic growth. People think they've conquered the world. And you reflect on this country, and we're in a deep funk. I mean, we're dispirited as people. It's an unnatural place for the most optimistic folks in the world to be. That has to change, and so what do you do to change that? I can't think of 3 more important steps that are more pro-growth focused or pro-confidence focused than fixing a dilapidated, anachronistic tax code. Same thing I did as governor. It brought life to the system. So that I'll meet with Congress, I'll say, here's my proposal. It's not complicated. The Simpson-Bowles Commission report basically recommended the same thing. It's had a bipartisan scrubbing, which means it's completely doable in Congress. And second, I want some regulatory reform. I want some certainty and some predictability in terms of how our marketplace is seen and operated within. And third, I want to take at least a couple of steps toward greater energy diversity. Because I just can't stomach the idea that we have this transfer of wealth that adds to our trade imbalance year after year that is so easily fixed. So easily fixed, that's the thing about it. And I'd say we have 2 years. Let's not rest until we get this done and report back to the American people as soon as we achieve something. Guaranteed the marketplace would come to life. The very fact that you were having a pro-growth discussion with the American people and Congress, the marketplace would respond. We can't remember the last time we actually had a pro-growth discussion in this country. It's been so long. And then I would point out the obvious in the larger international economic environment, and that is we have an opportunity with China. Instead of 8, 9, 10% growth that they've experienced for 30 years running, their economy is faltering because of inflation running quite high in city centers. Manufacturing costs are going through the roof, 10 to 15% increases in the southern manufacturing zone. So their growth will be more like 4, 5, and 6% per year going forward, which is a very precarious place for the Chinese to find themselves because unemployment will spike. And as unemployment spikes, you get a larger itinerant workforce roaming the countryside into the city centers, which creates political instability, which is a nightmare scenario in parts of China. And the result of that is tremendous uncertainty about their future. And that means the investment dollar that always just sort of conveniently parks itself for manufacturing purposes in China is going to be looking for another alternative. No question about it. And we should position ourselves as that alternative. And we should broadcast to the world that we're back in the game. And we're going to fix our competitive environment. We're going to work on things like job training and preparation through more vocational programs and community colleges, the stuff we used to do that we don't do anymore. And I'd sit down with the heads of manufacturing, the Manufacturing Alliance, the Business Roundtable, the Chamber of Commerce. I'd say, folks, I know you've got capital expenditures planned for all corners of the world for your manufacturing companies. But on behalf of the American people, I want you to do it here. And in exchange for that consideration, when you go back to your boards of directors, we're going to fix taxes, we're going to fix the regulatory environment, and we're going to get us on a road toward greater energy independence. I don't think you'd have a CEO in the bunch who would walk away from that kind of meeting and say, I think we'll go to Brazil, thank you very much. People want to do it here. They want to believe in this country again. They need to believe that leadership is actually behind them in terms of truly improving the marketplace.
You know, China is in the midst of a very aggressive expansion of its military. And the question is that something we should be concerned about? I know the president's in the region now trying to kind of bolster concerns there might be with other Asian countries about what China's ambitions are. You've been there. You have a sense of what the culture is like. What do you think China's military ambitions are?
Their military ambitions are to secure their trade routes so they can keep the mothership fueled. So if you stop to think that the central premise of governance in China is to keep the party viable, which is a carryover from Deng Xiaoping's 3 major dictates of 1978. And in order to keep the party viable, you've got to produce growth rates that provide stability. In order to maintain those growth rates, you've got to procure raw materials from sources of the world that allow you to keep the economy moving. So for them, it all goes back to stability that maintains the primacy of the party. And so the military will be built in a way that protects their periphery, to be sure, when you're surrounded by 14 or 15 nation states that are in various states of disarray. But beyond that, allowing to, at some point, regroup or to obtain some of their lost territories, so-called, like the Spratlys and the Paracels in the South China Sea, and then to secure trade routes. That means that they're spending on the military side, which is about $90 billion a year, compared to our $650 billion a year. We forget sometimes we spend more than the rest of the world combined on defense. Their focus is primarily maritime, but also missiles as well. They have a very significant focus on. But for us, it means that we need stronger military-to-military ties in terms of a dialogue that allows for more transparency, our ability to understand what they're spending, what their areas of focus are, and what it means to our interests in the region. And we should spell out very clearly and in very certain terms what our aspirations are for the East Asia Pacific region. They're very clear, and they've been the same for over 100 years since, we went into the Philippines in 1898 or 1899. And that is, we want stability. We want to keep the sea lanes open for trade and commerce. Everybody benefits from the investment we make in the 7th Fleet and in the Pacific Fleet and in the Pacific Command operating region. We need to focus more on the Asia-Pacific region. That goes more into my defense and national security priorities, where, frankly, I have to say Afghanistan is not in our nation's future. And Iraq is not our nation's future.
How would Mitt Romney's approach to China play with the Chinese leaders?
Well, I'm not certain what his approach is. I've only heard about one protectionist idea he has.
He's been a little hawkish, shall we say, in the debates about how he would deal with China.
Well, listen, that always generates an applause line. There's no question about that. The reality is, for 40 years, since Nixon stepped off the plane in February of 1972, you sit down at a table, you negotiate your issues. You don't do it by loudspeaker across the Pacific Ocean. Then each side gets more dug in, and you've got a real problem. Then you've got a trade war in your hands. You sit down at the table and you say, this is a multifaceted, complicated relationship. You've got trade, of which you have many subcategories: currency, intellectual property rights, market expansion, financial services, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. You've got North Korea. You've got weaponization in Iran. You've got Pakistan, a candidate for a future failed nation. You've got the South China Sea. You've got international economic rebalancing. You've got environmental issues. There's a lot on the table. So you say, in order to get anything done with the Chinese, it's got to be a sit-down negotiation with real leverage that we bring to the table, which is one thing we lack today. We don't have the leverage we used to have in the old days because we don't have an economy that's working. The Chinese respect economic strength. We don't have that economic strength, so automatically we're put at a disadvantage at the negotiating table. But you've got to say, if we're going to make this relationship work, you recognize right off the bat that there are a lot of issues on which we have deep disagreements. The role of the individual in society, not least of them. But you got to sit down and figure out solutions on all of these. So if we're going to ask for their help on Iran sanctions in the UN Security Council, they're going to want something on this side. I mean, it's a negotiation where everything matters on the table. And trade is an important part of that. And when they violate their commitments, listen, I was the U.S. Trade Ambassador when they became a member of the WTO in November of 2001. I was part of that effort in Doha Qatar when they entered the WTO, and so did Taiwan, staggered so that China couldn't make it impossible for Taiwan to enter. They have obligations that they need to meet, and they don't do that all the time, and it's a problem. And we should be on them constantly and aggressively when they violate those trade agreements. And just as aggressively, we should be going after our natural constituents and allies within China. It's called the young emerging entrepreneurial class, because they want China to open up more, and they want to sell more of their products in China, and they want to see a properly valued currency. And so you've got a natural alliance with a lot of the young entrepreneurs who are probably a whole lot better at putting pressure on the Chinese government than we are. And over the longer term, they probably are going to have, as was the case with Taiwan in the late 1980s, probably a better impact in bringing about economic reform, driving the very issues that we're trying to drive as well.
Governor, many of your opponents have been outspoken on either cutting foreign aid dramatically or eliminating it altogether. Why is that a bad idea?
Well, we can't afford doing business the way we have in the past, just to begin the discussion. We just can't afford a lot of these things. But to say you're going to zero out foreign aid completely probably is not recognizing America's interests abroad. Because some aid goes to bolster rule of law programs in countries that otherwise wouldn't have them. They go to bolster and strengthen human rights. They provide health care support, from which we learn a whole lot as well and benefit from that information. It maybe goes some distance in keeping the peace between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So I say it's just common sense to think that we just can't do everything the way we used to do it. So I think we have to analyze foreign aid in a way that says, I want to be able to explain to the American people exactly what we're getting as a return on our invested dollar. And if it isn't going to promote, expand freedom, or to expand market opportunities for our exporters, then I think it has to be seriously looked at and dismissed if that's the case. If you've got Pakistan that might have $3 or $4 billion a year that disappears in the hip pockets of generals, you just can't do that. You've got to approach the market differently, one that either incentivizes the behavior of Pakistan, for example, or just dismiss it altogether, because we can't afford aid money that just doesn't have a return that is in our interest as a country. And I would scrub it and evaluate it appropriately.
Governor, I was interested, you were just talking about the young entrepreneur class in China, and you've mentioned before the number of internet users and bloggers in China. What are the chances we're going to see any kind of real social reform in the country? I mean, is this going to drive any kind of change over the coming years?
It's a very good and legitimate question. To my mind, there's no choice. So when you have the new leadership step up at the 18th Party Congress next year, we have elections next year. In China, they have leadership changes, and they're substantial. So if you stop to think that 70% of the top 200 positions in China are going to turn over, this is wholesale change in China. The fifth generation is going to come to the forefront. They're younger, a little more worldly. They don't remember the Great Leap Forward, 1960 to 64, the famine that ensued. They barely remember the Cultural Revolution, 66 to 76. They do remember 30 years of 8, 9, and 10% economic growth. And so they have more of a hubristic, nationalistic tendency as a result of that. So that's the new generation that we're going to be dealing with. And it's going to present some challenges that are going to be very unique to our own country. But then they're going to have to stare down after they take power and have a year to consolidate, which is always what it takes. So by 2013, they will have consolidated power. Xi Jinping is the new president and head of party. And I think between 2014, 2016, 2017, if there aren't some serious accommodations made on the reform side, political reform, human rights, religious tolerance, recognizing the role of the internet in society, I think you have the serious prospects of a head-on collision between the reform-minded element and a status quo-focused Communist Party. And that spells real trouble in the years ahead if those accommodations are made. That's the reality of where China's going. Sure. That also plays into our earlier thesis about why the United States has an opportunity to begin winning back some manufacturing investment. Because China isn't looking at continued 8, 9, 10% growth for the next 30 years. There's trouble around the corner, and it's called political instability, and we have a huge opportunity. There's an opening here that we need to recognize and take advantage of.
Sure. We spent the last few minutes talking about all kinds of foreign policy. It seems like that this has not been a great talking point throughout this campaign. Why is that, and are we all suffering on account of it?
You mean foreign policy generally?
Foreign policy in general.
Why it hasn't been
a major talking point about the campaign.
Well, we have jobs that I think is the one issue on people's minds. The reason foreign policy should be part of it is because we're interlinked economically, and how China goes will impact our opportunities and our ability then to create jobs going forward. That's the way I see it. And what I've picked up living 4 times overseas is that we're that interconnected. So if jobs is going to be your number one priority, which for me it is, this country has no choice. We've got to grow, and we've got to grow soon. We've got to address the whole joblessness problem. But we're going to do it by improving our competitive environment and also being savvy enough to recognize some openings internationally where others are faltering, who have generally, captured so much of the manufacturing investment, and to see it a legitimate opportunity for us to step up and to recreate the greatest manufacturing economy the world has ever known. It's totally within our grasp.
If there's any crisis of leadership, it's in Europe right now. And the question here is, we sit here, we're as the United States economy is very concerned about what happens to Europe. What can we do at this point in time that can perhaps protect ourselves from what might be the collapse of the Eurozone? Is there anything, as president, you would position yourself to try and limit that damage to the U.S. economy as a consequence of what looks like a very dire situation in Europe?
I think you're quite right in asking what we do to protect ourselves. I think that kind of is the key question. First of all, if you want a picture of coming attractions, look at what your debt as a percentage of GDP does to you. So if we're at 70% debt to GDP today, I mean, just look at Italy at 120% debt to GDP. Look at Greece, 170% debt to GDP. Look at Japan. They're entering their third lost decade of growth. Third. They've been moribund for 3 decades now, and all because of that debt overhang. It becomes a national security problem at some point because you just don't grow with that overhang of debt. So, with respect to Europe, I think 2 things come to mind that we need to be aware of and prepare for. One is the Eurozone is our second largest export market after Canada, which is, Canada's $250 billion a year in exports. Eurozone's $240 billion a year. China, by comparison, is $90 billion. And so with the economy tanking in the Eurozone, there's going to be less to buy from the United States, which is going to impact our exporters. That's not a good thing, which means we're going to have to find some alternative markets. That's why, the rebalancing that is going on in China from their export platform, the largest the world has ever known, to more of a consumption model, is a very important transition that they're making. No time for a trade war with the Chinese. This is time for us to say, as they transition and become that large consumer market, which increasingly they are, going to take a few more years, and the policy choices for them are very significant. But they're moving steadily in that, which means our exports are going to be all the more viable in China. That's great for job creation in this country. As Europe falters, we need another engine of growth that will help pull us along. But the second part of what we need to be aware of is, as the metastasis continues within the banking sector in the Eurozone, is to say that, when it hits our banks, we've got a problem. The taxpayers of this country do, because we have banks that are too big to fail. And if you've got institutions that are too big to fail, which they are today, then you kind of have an implied bailout by the taxpayers. And there you have it, another bailout on the horizon, unless we do something about it. It's not an easy fix, but it's to say that you can fix taxes, you can fix the regulatory environment, you can move toward greater energy independence, take some really proactive growth steps, but you're still left with 6 banks that combined have assets that equal 2/3 of our GDP, 66%, $9.4 trillion. And with this implied guarantee under Dodd-Frank that is set to bail them out if that need arises. So if you have a $2 or $3 trillion institution, they can't fail. Everybody goes south. And that's where we are, and I'm concerned about that part. And that needs to be looked at, analyzed, and addressed somehow, some way. I think that's the biggest lingering risk that we as an economy run with what's happening over in Europe right now.
Governor, we're getting pretty close to the deadline for the super committee, which is coming up next week. I'm interested in your thoughts. In terms of whether you thought that was a good idea originally, where do you see the process going? Do you think that they're going to be able to reach some kind of a compromise, or what happens next?
I think the fact that we have a super committee is an admission of failure right off the top. I mean, this is a time for presidential leadership to drive home a debt and spending and a tax reform program that really makes sense, to bring people together. I mean, we've got some programs on the table. You've got Simpson Bowles, you got the Ryan plan, you got the Rivlin Domenici plan. They're all there, but no leadership. Everyone's recreated the wheel here. They're right on the table, but no one has led forward on these things. So in the absence of leadership, you have mischief making, and you have more committees that form. But I guess the thing that strikes me is the most unhelpful part of it is they're targeting $1.5 trillion over 10 years, which to my mind isn't nearly what we ought to be shooting for. Way south of the mark. You know, we need something between $4 and $6 trillion over the next 10 years if we're going to get spending down to a percentage of GDP that actually is sustainable, not $1.5 trillion. So my fear is, you know, they'll make some accommodations here, they'll kick the can down the road, and we're going to wake up again in the years ahead, and we're going to find ourselves stuck in the same place because we weren't bold enough, we weren't courageous enough to do politically what needs. So what if you don't get reelected? I mean, the nation is at risk here. I mean, something's got to be done. And I fear that that which must be done just isn't going to be done. We're going to kick the can down the road.
Well, assuming that because, I mean, the Republicans are so dead set against any sort of revenue enhancement or tax increases, that most of this is, from the Republicans' perspective, going to come from spending cuts. And that, inevitably, if you're talking that kind of money, it's got to come from the entitlements. There's really no way around that.
Right.
And yet there has been very little sort of courage out there to really address that seriously. So where do you stand on entitlements, or where do you think they can be cut back? You know, when you have AARP running advertisements saying, don't you dare, you know, cut my Social Security because there's millions of us out there that are going to vote you out of office.
Well, this is exactly the kind of talk that should be energizing every college student on every college campus in America, because what they're about to inherit is a shipwrecked economy. This debt problem. I mean, it will so shipwreck their generation, they'll be bailing out for their entire lives. They'll be deleveraging forever. And this is what we're bequeathing to the next generation. And I say that's completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. So you either put a bold proposal on the table that says we have to be a little politically courageous here. If we lose our jobs, that's okay. These jobs weren't meant to be lifetime positions anyway. They're meant to do the work of the people. I like the Ryan plan. I like what Ryan has put on the table. I've talked to him about it. I'm the only candidate who has actually embraced the Ryan plan. I think, you know, the 6.3 trillion he's targeting over 10 years is right. I think what he's doing on Medicare is right. Because what's the alternative? We do nothing. And by 2020, you know, based on current revenue models, you cover Medicare, Social Security, interest payment on the debt, and you're done. What do you do about national defense? What do you do about disaster relief and everything else? So we have no choice. We have to act. And if you're going to act boldly. No more half steps. So you wake up in 2 or 3 more years, you have the same problem. It's only been exacerbated over time. So my speech on debt and spending is a pretty simple one. You know, as I say, it's 3 words. It's the Ryan plan. I think we've got a plan. We just need a little leadership in the executive branch that'll stand behind it and move it forward. It doesn't cover Social Security. But Social Security, you know, if the political will is there, and you've got a president who's willing to frame it properly, you know, we need to change the underlying assumptions on inflation to be tied more to real wage growth as opposed to the consumer price index, and take the top third of income earners and means test them, and to provide a flow of benefits that is less aggressive than for others. It's a shared sacrifice. Everybody's going to have to step up and recognize that to right the ship of state is going to require a shared sacrifice. And let's start with Social Security for the top third income earners. I think a lot of them would say, I get that, I understand it, thanks for calling on me to step up and sacrifice. I'm willing to do that for my country. We don't have a choice. And then beyond that, I would say, since what we picked up since 1935. You know, when the average length of life was 61.7 years, you worked for 40 years, you took out 2, that was a pretty good deal. But what we picked up for somebody born in the early 1900s versus today is 3 decades of life. So let's push out the eligibility age, the age where these benefits kick in, out to a point in time that is a little more realistic with the average length of life today. So let's just say the 89th or the 90th percentile of the average length of life today versus what it was in 1935. If you can do those 2 things, the means testing based on a different underlying assumption on inflation and get the eligibility age moved out a little bit, we can hold true to Social Security, and we should.
We have a question that's been submitted from someone who's watching online, and it has to do with how competitive do you think we are with the rest of the world when it comes to education, and how can we improve our educational system?
We're better than some, worse than others, but we've fallen behind based on where we ought to be as people. Fallen behind at the primary levels and fallen behind, I think, in the areas of job training and workforce preparation. We have the finest universities and colleges in the world. Make no mistake about that. People still come here from all over to attend them because they're that good. And they're still the envy of the world. So if you look at, you know, where the Chinese and others are going with their higher ed system, they're looking at what we've done. And they're saying, what do we need to do to get away from rote learning and get more of the critical analysis, critical thinking, more of the Socratic method within the classroom. And they're experimenting more and more with that at the higher ed level. So if I would say at the primary level, and listen, I've just run a clinical trial on this. I've got 7 kids. So I've seen about every variation of education, public, private, daughter homeschooled, she's a great piano player, international schools. I've seen it all. And I walk away from that saying, number one, I'm not sure there's a role for Washington in terms of micromanaging the affairs of education. Nobody wants their schools to fail at a local level. Families don't. School board members don't. Local elected officials don't. So let's recognize the reality. Let them be in charge of their destiny. Just give them the tools they need to succeed. They'll do fine. Second of all, we need more in the way of choice and opportunities for our kids in primary schools. Because every child walks in the classroom with a different attitude, temperament, and approach to learning. Every one of them has a genius, and we don't discover that sometimes until later in life, and that's a shame. But every student walks in with a different approach. So a one-size-fits-all model just isn't going to cut it. And if we're going to be competitive longer term, we're going to have to expand the marketplace to include more in the way of choice. I signed the second voucher bill in this country as governor back many years ago. We expanded charter schools very aggressively because I felt our people needed more choice. So high schools that had math, science, engineering, arts, music, kids who can gravitate toward that which they have an innate capability. They do better that way. Third, there's nothing longer term that is quite as effective as early childhood development. And I think we're going to figure this one out more and more. If we can lock in the pillars of cognitive learning around reading and math by age 6 or 7, we will have given those kids the greatest gift you can give them, and that's literacy. And they're going to go on and do a whole lot better in school, and they're going to be more productive workers. And if we fail, which we're failing a whole lot today at it, you've got remediation costs, you've got kids who fall through the cracks, and you have a less productive workforce. And it isn't about funding always, it's about prioritizing. It's about what you put your emphasis on. We tried this in our state, to focus on early childhood development. We did it in some schools and found it to be very powerful. Lock in those pillars of literacy around math and reading by age 6 and 7. You got a problem? You got a problem then. And you can deal with it. But if not, you give those kids a great gift called literacy. And I think that takes them all the way through education. And then going up to higher ed, we need more vocational programs. We need more job training programs. We need more community colleges, all of which are more affordable and all of which prepare the next generation for work and job opportunities. And moreover, programs as we did in our state that are more custom fit and aligned to the marketplace. So biotechnology, health sciences, information technology, aerospace design, whatever it might be, we had them all in our state. You align those businesses with institutions in their area so that the kids, their curricula is designed in a way that will allow them to be instantly deployable, which is great for them because they have a job right out of school. And it's great for the investors because they need a reliable flow of competent and well-trained workers. And it's good all the way around. We have not done this in this country, and we need to reinvigorate our approach to workforce training and development. Germany's done it. They've become a great export power in recent years.
Do you think there's any validity to the notion that one of the reasons why we're having so much trouble bringing down the unemployment rate, putting people to work, is because the jobs we're creating, we haven't have the properly trained people to fill those jobs?
There's a lot to that. There's a lot to that. We have to back up then and to make sure that we have some custom fit relationship, some sort of alliance with education, with our job training centers and our community colleges that begin to address this. I think that's absolutely correct.
You've talked a lot during the session. You brought it up a number of times in terms of a failure of leadership, I think is how you termed it. Are you only talking about the president in this case, or do you think that that's transferable to other people in Washington?
Congress isn't doing what it should be doing because there's no executive leadership. So if you have no executive leadership, you have mischief making on Capitol Hill. That fills the void. You have partisanship, hyper-partisanship, people pointing fingers of blame and not doing the work of the people. I think that was on clear display during the debt ceiling debate, where I was just aghast. Every single Republican I'm running against was in favor of basically defaulting. Defaulting, the United States of America, 25% of the world's GDP. We set the rhythm for the financial services sector for the entire globe. Defaulting. I mean, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's like, what world is everybody living in? But this is, where we are today. It's the extremes that are finger pointing, engaged in blaming one another as opposed to churning out the work of the people. And so I would say there's an abdication of failure, everywhere you look right now. And it starts with presidential leadership, I do believe. Congress will follow. They want to get the work of the people done, I believe. But they need something to work on. They need something put before them that says, the people want this done. It's great for our competitiveness and creating jobs. We know it's not perfect in everybody's eyes, but let's get after it. See if we can make it the very best we can. That's how it used to get done in our country. And we need to return to those days.
One of the issues that always comes up with candidates is, are you the candidate that is best able to defeat President Obama come November? Why do you think you may be the most electable candidate of the Republican offerings?
Well, the New York Times ran an interesting story a couple of Sundays ago where they did this quantitative analysis that they've done apparently election year after election year that looks at a number of indicators. And then they throw up different scenarios based on GDP growth, the president's popularity ratings, et cetera, et cetera. I was the only Republican in that analysis who beat Barack Obama in every single scenario, including that which was most favorable for the president, 4% GDP growth going into next year, which is not going to happen. But even under those conditions, I still beat him. So electability is important. And after we come out of New Hampshire with a head of steam, then the discussion in South Carolina and beyond in Florida is going to be more and more about electability, because you've proven something here in New Hampshire that is important, that people all of a sudden take note of. And then it becomes, maybe he can do it. We didn't talk about it during the early years. He didn't light his hair on fire in the debates. He didn't engage in theatrics of various kinds. But all of a sudden, New Hampshire is telling us something here that's very, very important. We had to pay attention, and this guy appears to be electable. And I think that's then how it translates onward. But for my re-election in 2008, I learned an important lesson. I won just under 80% of the vote, got 78% of the vote for re-election. Not because I'm a good politician. I'm not a good politician. I learned that, the people just want to be squared with. They just want to be told what you think you can do. And then they want you to honestly and earnestly go about doing it. And then they'll hold you responsible. So we got the Republicans, we got a whole lot of independents, and I got more Democrats, my Democratic opponent. And I thought, that's not politics, that's leadership. People want to be led. They want you to do your best.
Can you define head of steam? Do you think you have to come out of New Hampshire with a victory, with a strong second place showing, give you some viability?
We have to exceed market expectations, which we will do with the head of steam.
What are you seeing out there that's giving you this confidence, this hope? What are you seeing with the people you meet?
Listen, we've done 100 public events. I don't think anyone's come close to that. And you start small, and you move into events like we had last night, where you get a whole lot of people packed into the town hall, and you talk to a lot of people afterwards. And there's a level of connection with folks. They hear your message. They begin to understand who you are, what you're all about, what you've done, where you've come from, what you hope to do for the country. And we get, it's an open primary. We get a lot of independents showing up at our events. They want a home. They want someplace to park. And Republicans, independents, they turn out and they come up after and say, I like your message. I want to support you. Or I'm now at event number 3. I've watched, I've analyzed, I've listened. I want to help you. I want to support you. Or I was with somebody before, and now I want to be on your side. I hear enough of this out there, and you can sense there's a visceral connection with people when you're with them that I sense is a very good one. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but I've been through a couple of elections before, and you can generally tell when you're connecting with folks. I like being the underdog. When I ran for governor, I think I had one member of the legislature who supported me.
When you decide to make New Hampshire the cornerstone of your campaign, the do or die in New Hampshire type of attitude, what contributes to that decision? Is it because it is a small state that you can come and have 100 events, or is it something because of its size it may not require as many resources if you were trying to cover a bigger state? What goes into that decision-making process to make New Hampshire so important?
It has what I would like to provide for the U.S. economy, a level playing field. Whether you're big, whether you're small, whether you have money, whether you don't, whether you've got a big organization or not, you can compete. And you can bring your ideas forward, and you can get a fair hearing. And whether it was Carter, Clinton, Lamar Alexander, John McCain, would come into the market, low single digits. They get around and get to know people. People hear them out, and the marketplace responds. So when you've got 1.5 million people, 150 or 60,000 of whom are going to make the difference, you say, I like my odds. It's a level playing field. You buy your way to victory. You can't put up enough ads to win the day. You've got to do the old Adlai Stevenson shoe leather on the ground. You've got to grind it out in ways that proves a point and allows people to get to know you, who you are, your heart and soul. That's what they want to come to know.
Governor, we're pretty much right up against the close. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to leave with us this morning?
Well, we didn't get into healthcare. We can get into that another day because that's a significant discussion. I'm just honored and pleased to be with you here, and would ask for continued fair hearing and for your consideration, and tell you that this is a remarkable state. This is the window through which the rest of the country are able to really understand the candidates. That makes this state exceedingly important in the process, and it's a great honor to participate in this election cycle.
Hey, thank you, Governor. And that brings to a close today's Telegraph Editorial Board session with former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman. I'd like to thank the Governor for taking the time to meet with us today. I'd also like to thank the students and staff at Nashua High School for making this all possible. And I'd like to invite everyone to join us again on Monday at 10:50 a.m. when the Telegraph Editorial Board will be meeting with another candidate for president, this time former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. Thank you and have a good day.